Hi, I'm Pastor Kurt, and this is your 5-minute Bible study. Today, we're going to be looking at Daniel, chapters 5 and 6. Now, in the previous video, I talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being in the fiery furnace during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Remember, all of this takes place during the Babylonian exile. Well, now, King Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the king. Instead, there's a new Babylonian king named Belshazzar. Well, at one point, Belshazzar throws this grand party, and all of a sudden, this disembodied hand starts writing on the wall. It is from this story that we get the phrase, "the handwriting is on the wall." That phrase, of course, means that something bad is about to happen, which we see play out in this story. The king, though, doesn't know how to interpret what the hand wrote. The queen, though, knows about Daniel and his ability to interpret. So Daniel comes in, reads the handwriting on the wall, and delivers the bad news to the king. Daniel basically tells the king that he has not been faithful to the Lord God, that he has turned aside and worshipped idols, and now his kingdom is going to be taken from his hand and given to someone else. That does play out. Eventually, Belshazzar is no longer king, and instead Darius comes to the throne. Well, before Belshazzar is dethroned, he promotes Daniel, and Daniel basically becomes the third person in charge. Well, by the time Darius takes the throne, Daniel still has this position, and King Darius becomes quite fond of Daniel. Well, Daniel suddenly got this promotion. And now all of the people who are under him are a little bit jealous that he received this position instead of that. So they don't like Daniel so much. And they're trying to find a way to get back at Daniel because he has been favored by the king. So they devise this plot and get the king to agree that anyone who doesn't bow down and worship the king shall be thrown into the lion's den. Well, of course, Daniel, being a good Jew, is not going to bow down and worship the king. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the earlier chapter were not going to bow down to some idol. Well, after the king issues this decree, these underlings under Daniel spot him praying to God, and so bring him before the king. The king has to follow his own law and throws Daniel in the lion's den. But the king does not want to do it. The king wants to protect Daniel, but he also can't go back on his own word. So after Daniel is put in the lion's den, the king basically can't sleep at all that night. The next morning, he quickly hurries to the lion's den and opens it up, tries to see if Daniel is alive, and of course, Daniel is. After Daniel is taken out of the lion's den, the king then orders that all of these people who accuse Daniel of this, that they should be thrown in the lion's den. Before they even reach the bottom of the pit, the lions destroy them. So Daniel was kept safe, but those who accuse him are then killed. We can see a lot of parallels in this story from previous stories we've looked at. There are connections to the Joseph story with this interpretation. Remember, Joseph was able to interpret dreams. Here we see that Daniel is able to interpret the handwriting on the wall. There's also a little bit of connection back to the Esther story. If you remember that story, Esther was the queen. She was this Jewish queen, but then there was this decree from Haman that all the Jews should be killed. In the end, Esther rescued her people, and Haman was then killed, just like the people who accused Daniel that they were eventually thrown in the lion's den. So we've got some neat references back to earlier stories. One thing to pay attention to here in this text, though, is that God was working through Daniel in the interpretation of the handwriting on the wall, and God was working for Daniel by protecting him in the lion's den. When we look at these two stories together, it helps us understand why there was this jealousy toward Daniel to begin with. He had received this promotion due to his ability to interpret the handwriting on the wall. Sometimes we forget that the handwriting on the wall and the story of Daniel in the lion's den, that they go together. But they do. It's chapters 5 and 6 here. So Daniel had God working through him, and he had God working for him. In our lives, God is working in you through the gifts that God has given you to share with others. And God is working for you. No matter what challenges and struggles and trials you face, God is there with you. There's your 5-minute Bible study for the day. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.